pieces of furniture for the nursery. Jake is supposed to put together the furniture while his wife is out of town at her baby shower. How will Jake's wife be able to measure Jake's behavior? So, Jake needs to build all this furniture, set up the nursery, get everything ready to go for when his wife gets back from her baby shower. His wife says, I'm going to measure what you do, even though I'm out of town. How will she be able to do that? Okay, she can't directly observe Jake building this furniture. So what is she going to do? Okay, is she going to use time sampling? Well, in order to use time sampling, like momentary time sampling, we need to actually observe the behavior happening. She's not observing again. So what is she going to do? Is she going to use interval recording? Well, that's going to be the same thing as time sampling, right? Even though it's discontinuous, we still need to observe the behavior happening. ABC recording, same thing. You have to be able to record the antecedents and the consequences, meaning you need to directly observe what is happening. She's not actually going to watch Jake build the furniture. She's only going to measure the what? She's only going to measure the outcome of the product of the behavior. When you measure the outcome and the product of the behavior, what type of measurement are you using? Of course, you're using permanent product. So with permanent product, you don't actually need to watch the behavior happen. You only need to measure the outcome. She does not need to see Jake build all this furniture. His duty is to put it together. Okay, so she just wants to see that it's put together. She doesn't care how it gets there. As long as it's put together, she can measure it using permanent product, and she can say, yes, you've done it, or no, this is not what I want. So again, Jake's wife is going to use permanent product to measure Jake's furniture building behavior. Which of the following is true about behavior as it relates to applied behavior analysis? As RBTs, you're going to be working with behavior, which is very exciting. It's a very fun profession, okay, very rewarding. We get to study human behavior. Who doesn't want to do that, right? However, there are some main truths we need to maintain about behavior in our field, okay? We're talking about in our field, right? Applied behavior analysis. So let's look. What of the following is true? A, behavior is anything an organism does. Absolutely, that's the definition of behavior. Anything an organism does is behavior, okay? So A is definitely true. Do we just pick A and move on? No, what do? We always read all of our answer choices, okay? Especially when we're studying, so we know why the wrong answers are wrong. But on the exam, we need to find the best answer. Don't just pick A and move on. Read all of your answer choices, okay? Make sure you've got the right answer. So A is absolutely true about behavior. B, behavior should be observable and measurable. Absolutely, okay? We acknowledge that some behaviors are private. However, as it relates to applied behavior analysis and what we're going to be doing with our treatment plans and our implementation, our behaviors should be observable and measurable. If they're not observable and not measurable, we can't change them, and we're trying to make behavior changes. So yes, B is correct as well. C, behavior happens for a reason. Yes, what is another word for this? Well, of course, the function, right? The function of the behavior. Escape, attention, tangible, automatic sensory. Behavior always happens for a reason. Okay, it doesn't just appear out of thin air. Behavior is determined. So, which of the following is true about behavior? Well, A, behavior is anything an organism does. B, behavior should be observable and measurable. And then, of course, C, behavior happens for a reason. So that leaves us with the best answer, which is D. That's why, one, you read all of your answer choices, okay? Because you never know if there's more than one right answer, if there's a better answer. And again, when you're studying, read all your answer choices, know why the wrong answers are wrong. That's going to make you better at the test. It's going to make you faster. There are a lot of people who give us feedback who say they passed their exam with 30, 40 minutes to spare, okay? They didn't get there by rushing. They got there by getting really good at the exam, okay? When you get good at the exam, speed comes along with that. Logan just mastered out identical receptive matching. Now, Logan is going to start learning how to match non-identical pictures. What would the ideal reinforcement schedule be to maintain Logan's identical receptive matching ability? Okay, that's a mouthful, right? So slow down, right? When we have long, wordy questions, let's just slow down. We're not going to panic. Let's identify what the question is asking. The question wants to know about the ideal reinforcement schedule to maintain Logan's receptive matching ability. Notice how the question tries to trick you, right? They say he just mastered out identical receptive matching, and now we're going to teach him something new. Then they go backwards and say they want to still talk about his mastered out skill. They want to maintain that skill. We're not talking about the skill we're teaching. We're talking about the skill we want to maintain. So when we want to maintain a skill, what is essential? Well, we need a thin reinforcement schedule, meaning the response requirement for reinforcement needs to be relatively high. So we want to find the reinforcement schedule, which is going to require more effort and more responses to produce reinforcement because we're maintaining this already learned behavior. So FR1 is continuous reinforcement. FR1 would be great to teach our new skill, but when we want to maintain a skill, we need to fade that out. We shouldn't be reinforcing every single time someone does a skill we're trying to maintain, okay? Again, FR1 is great for teaching. We're looking to maintain. FR3 is still pretty thin. It's better than FR1, but it's still very thin. We only need 3 responses to get reinforcement. Remember, we want to maintain this behavior, okay? We're not teaching it. VR4, yes, okay, even better, right? Our VR schedule is our strongest basic reinforcement schedule. And we want to maintain this identical receptive matching ability. VR4 would be excellent. Logan can't predict when reinforcement is coming. Reinforcement is going to be delivered at random or on an average and for a higher amount of responses than an FR1 and an FR3. VR4 looks pretty good. Let's look at D, fixed interval 1. Again, it's a very thick schedule, okay? After a minute passes, we receive reinforcement. The interval is also fixed, okay? So Logan doesn't have to continue to engage in the behavior, right? Because he can start to predict that after 1 minute, he's going to receive reinforcement as long as he engages in the behavior at least once, okay? So our best basic reinforcement schedule to maintain this behavior is a VR4. Make sure you understand this question. Make sure you understand the difference between teaching and learning and then maintaining a behavior as it relates to reinforcement schedules, okay? Very important, there's a distinction. Continuous reinforcement like FR1 is great for teaching. Variable reinforcement or variable ratio, okay, and intermittent reinforcement are great for maintaining. In a written skill acquisition plan, the first step is identifying a skill to teach. After a skill is identified, what should be done next? So skill acquisition plan, the first thing we do is identify a skill. After we identify that skill, what do we need to do? Do we collect data? Do we implement? Do we create a goal? Or do we gather baseline? Well, don't get ahead of ourselves, right? All we've done is pick the skill. Let's say the skill we picked is tying our shoes. Can we just jump into collecting data? Well, no, we haven't done anything else, right? We have no measurement, we have no goal, we don't have any baseline. The first step is picking that skill. We then have other things afterwards. So collecting data is not going to be second, right? We have other things we need to do first. Implement. Sure, implement comes before collecting data, but we're still missing some things. What are we missing? We're missing goals, we're missing baselines, okay? We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Should we create a goal next? So first, we pick a skill, then we need a goal, right? How will we know when we master this goal? What are we trying to achieve, okay? Not only is the goal going to let us know when we've mastered something, it's going to help with our measurement systems, okay? It's going to help when we need to adjust our interventions. So yes, first we pick a skill, then we pick a goal. We don't gather baseline, right, until we have a goal, because we need to know what are we trying to get to, what are we trying to measure, right? Skill first, goal second, then we can go into gathering baseline, implementing interventions, and collecting data. 6 hours ago, Billy got out of bed and turned on his coffee machine. 4 hours ago, Billy arrived at work. 2 hours ago, Billy received an email about a meeting with his boss. 30 seconds ago, Billy walked into his boss's office. His boss asked him to sit down and said he is giving Billy a raise. What is the antecedent to Billy receiving a raise? All right, don't get cute and don't fall into the trap here, okay? Yes, an antecedent is what? Antecedents are what happens before the behavior. In this question, we get a million things that happen before, okay, Billy receiving a raise, right? What is the antecedent? The antecedent is what happens before the behavior, but more specifically, what happens directly before the behavior, okay? So yes, all of these things happen before Billy receiving a raise, but when we're looking at antecedents, we want to identify what happens directly before the behavior, okay, as close to that behavior as possible. So in this case, if we're looking for the antecedent, we need to find out what happened as close as possible to Billy receiving a raise. Was it Billy getting out of bed, Billy receiving an email, Billy walking into the boss's office, or Billy's boss asking him to sit down? Well, let's go back to our question. It says Billy, he is giving Billy a raise. Right before that, what happens? His boss asked him to sit down. So all of this stuff is happening before Billy gets a raise, but what happens right before? His boss asked him to sit down. So more of a, I guess you should say, a question to test your fundamentals, okay? It's kind of a strangely worded question, but the idea is to reinforce that an antecedent is, when we're trying to identify antecedents, we want to know what happens exactly before the behavior, okay? For example, as a BCBA, when I'm interviewing parents and I ask for antecedents, okay, and they start telling me about the morning and what they had for breakfast and this, that, and the other thing, all that's great. Those can be setting events. Those can have an impact. But what I'm really looking for is what happens right before they tantrum, immediately before, okay? The closer we can get to identifying what happens right before a response, the better we're going to be at changing what follows the antecedent, okay? So in this case, the antecedent, what happens right before Billy gets a raise, is Billy's boss asked him to sit down. You just passed your RBT exam and earned your certification. The following week, you start on a case. The first day in the case, your client's mom asked if you think the client should get a COVID vaccine or not. How should you respond? All right, hot topic, right? Everybody has their opinions, okay? However, what are we doing? We are delivering behavior analytics services in a professional capacity. As an RBT, you have a very clear role in service delivery, right? What is your role? Your role is to implement, okay? You assist in parent training, you assist in treatment design, but your primary goal is implementation. If your client or your client's mom starts asking you about diets, vaccines, okay, schooling, anything else, what do you do? Okay, what do you do in that situation? A, explain that you haven't been on the case long enough to provide an answer. Okay, maybe that's one way to get out of answering, but this opens the door for them to ask you future questions about this type of thing, okay? Your role is not to answer these type of questions, right? That is your supervisor's role, okay? Now, you might be a professional in some aspects on diet or whatever it might be, okay? However, in the case of our team, okay, this is going to be the supervisor's role, right? So what do you do? B, give your educated opinion on the matter. Absolutely not, okay? The reason is the person ultimately responsible for your client is your supervisor, okay? They have a responsibility to the board, they have a responsibility to the client, and a responsibility to the company. If something happens with the client, it is on them, okay? Which gives them a lot of responsibility in trying to steer the client in the best direction possible, okay? So regardless of how you feel about it, right, we need to do what? We need to refer the client to the supervisor. And this is straight from our task list, right? We always communicate with our supervisor openly, especially when we're asked questions by the client, okay, specific to things like diet, vaccines, schooling, etc. So in this case, you should always refer the client to your supervisor. We don't just ignore the client. It's still important that you have a good relationship with the client's family, especially if you're working in home. You want a good rapport, a good relationship, okay? However, all you need to say is, let me ask my supervisor and they'll get back to you, okay? It's not that RBTs aren't trusted, okay? It just goes to who ultimately bears the responsibility, okay, of what happens to the client. All right. Antonio, an RBT, attends a meeting with his supervisor, his client, the client's family, and the client's teacher. The teacher explains she would like to learn some ways to prevent behavior from happening. What is another way to describe what the teacher wants? Okay, slow down, figure out what the question is asking. The question is asking about how should we describe what the teacher wants? So let's identify what the teacher wants. I always recommend, if you read a question on the RBT exam and you feel like you're totally lost, start by identifying what the question is looking for. Remember, on the exam, they're going to provide you enough information in the question to answer the question. You don't need outside knowledge. You don't need anything, okay? Just use the information given. So start by identifying what the question is asking. The question wants to know, how are you going to describe what the teacher wants? So let's identify what the teacher wants. The teacher wants to learn some ways to prevent behavior from happening. What is another way to describe ways to prevent behavior from happening? Are these antecedent interventions, consequence interventions, punishment procedures, or differential reinforcement procedures? Well, what do we know about punishment? We know punishment happens after the behavior, okay? So those are reactive. Same with consequences and same with differential reinforcement. All these things are reactive, okay? After the behavior occurs, we react to the behavior, okay? And by providing consequences through differential reinforcement, punishment, whatever it may be. The teacher wants to prevent behavior. What do we call the interventions that prevent behavior? Those, of course, are antecedent interventions. Understand the difference. Antecedent interventions prevent behavior from happening. Consequence interventions like punishment and reinforcement react to behavior. So the teacher wants antecedent interventions to stop the behavior from happening before she has to implement some sort of consequence. When learning knife skills in the kitchen, one must start slowly and work their way up to speed. A good way to start is by slicing an onion very slowly and then gradually increasing your speed until you reach a mastery level. What is occurring as it relates to slicing the onion? What are you doing in this scenario? You're learning to chop, or you're learning knife skills on an onion. You start very slowly. What is mastery? Mastery is chopping speed. Whatever your mastery speed is, whatever that is, whatever your goal is, that is going to be mastery, okay? You don't start with mastery though. You start slowly, okay? And slowly work your way up. Maybe you're getting reinforced for what? For approximations of the mastery. And when we reinforce successive approximations of behavior, what are we ultimately doing? Are we prompting in this scenario? No, you don't need any prompts, okay, to slice your onion. You have some form of the skill, right? You can slice very slowly at first, but no one's prompting you through it. You're trying to build up speed to reach a terminal behavior or a mastery level. Are you shaping your behavior? Yes. You are slowly increasing your ability to reach this terminal or mastery level by going through successive approximations of a behavior. okay? Shaping, when we shape, we start with some version of a skill. Think about, let's say we're trying to teach imitation, and we want to teach our client to raise their arms in the air. When we first start, okay, as long as they move their arms slightly up in the air, we're going to reinforce. That's an approximation of the terminal behavior, which is arms fully in the air, okay? Same thing here. As long as you can slowly slice the onion, no matter how slow, we can build on that till we reach our mastery level. So you're shaping your behavior, this onion slicing behavior. Is discrimination happen? Remember, B might be our answer, but we want to read all of our answer choices. Why are the wrong answers wrong? Discrimination. Are we discriminating between two stimuli? No, we have the same response, slicing the same stimuli, okay? So one response, one stimulus, no discrimination happening, okay? We're not telling the difference between stimuli here, right? We are shaping our responses. And then escape avoidance. Are we trying to get out of anything? No, we are slicing our onion very slowly, trying to reach a mastery level. We are shaping our knife skills until we reach the level we want. Joanna started receiving stickers in school for using positive language about herself, but she does not receive stickers at home. Joanna uses significantly less positive language at home. What is possibly occurring in this scenario? This is going to be one of the most common things you run into as you go through your RBT career. Two environments, behavior happens at a high rate in one environment, and then when in the other environment, it occurs significantly less, okay? There's a great contrast between behavior. In this case, Joanna starts receiving reinforcement, okay, in school, that behavior shoots up. At home, that behavior goes down. Well, of course, right? She's receiving reinforcement for it in one environment and not in the other one, okay? So what is occurring? I just gave away the answer, basically. I gave you a hint, okay? There's a contrast happening, right? One environment behavior is high, one environment behavior is low. Is this an extinction burst? Well, no, an extinction burst is a result of an extinction, okay? We're not withholding reinforcement from anything. She's just not getting reinforced, okay? She was never reinforced in home. You can't have extinction if no previous reinforcement was delivered. Remember that, okay? So this is not an extinction burst. Punishment, is she being punished? Again, no stimuli is being added in the home environment. That's the key, right? In school, she's getting all this positive reinforcement. At home, nothing is changing. There's no extinction, there's no punishment, nothing, okay? Behavior contrast, yes, okay? Behavior contrast is when a behavior occurs at different rates in different environments. So in one environment, the behavior occurs at high rates. In another environment, the behavior occurs at much lower rates. There's a stark behavior contrast between school and home. This typically occurs when a reinforcement schedule or a punishment schedule is changed in one environment, but in not the other. Behavior contrast is occurring. And then finally, is this a high probability request sequence? Are we giving a lot of easy demands in order to evoke a harder demand? No high P request sequences going on. This is simply a case of behavior contrast. All right, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Remember, check out all of our study materials at rbtexamreview.com. Any questions or comments, please let me know. I'm happy to help. Keep working hard. Keep studying hard. I'll see you soon.